Sidney Powell, a 23-year-old former college student from Akron, Ohio, was sentenced to 15 years to life in prison for the brutal murder of her mother, Brenda Powell, in March 2020. The shocking crime occurred after Sidney learned she had been suspended from the University of Mount Union due to poor academic performance. In a fit of rage, Sidney struck her mother with an iron skillet and stabbed her nearly 30 times with a kitchen knife while Brenda was on a phone call with school officials discussing her daughter's situation. Despite pleading not guilty by reason of insanity, a jury found Sidney guilty of murder, felonious assault, and tampering with evidence in September 2023. Her defense argued that she was experiencing a psychotic break at the time of the murder, as she had been diagnosed with schizophrenia by 3 mental health experts. However, the prosecution presented evidence that Sidney's actions were methodical and purposeful, suggesting she was aware of her wrongdoing. But first, subscribe to our channel for more content, and don't forget to share it with your friends and family. Sidney Powell and her mother, Brenda, had always been close, with many describing them as each other's best friends. Brenda, a child life specialist at Akron Children's Hospital for nearly 30 years, was known for her compassion and dedication to helping children and their families. Sidney, a graduate of St. Vincent Street, Mary High School, had been a student at the University of Mount Union, where she was studying to follow in her mother's footsteps. However, the relationship between Sidney and Brenda began to strain as Sidney struggled academically at college. According to prosecutors, Sidney killed her mother to cover up the fact that she had been kicked out of school. The argument that led to the murder began when Brenda discovered Sidney's academic troubles during a phone call with school officials. In the days leading up to the murder, Sidney had been exhibiting concerning behavior, according to her family. In a letter to the judge, Sidney's father, Stephen Powell, described his daughter as in a catatonic state, not responding to audio stimuli in the hours after the killing. This behavior, coupled with Sidney's later diagnosis of schizophrenia, suggests that mental illness may have played a significant role in the tragedy. On the fateful day of March 24, 2020, Sidney Powell's life took a tragic turn. Brenda Powell was on a phone call with officials from the University of Mount Union, discussing her daughter's academic performance when the attack began. School officials heard screaming on the other end of the line and called the police. According to the prosecution, Sidney struck her mother in the head with an iron skillet, then went to the kitchen and grabbed a knife, stabbing Brenda nearly 30 times in the neck. The attack was so brutal that the phone call eventually cut off, with a voice later answering that claimed to be Brenda's, but was actually Sidney's. When police arrived at the scene, they found Sidney Powell in the driveway of the family home, in a catatonic state, not responding to audio stimuli. Brenda Powell was rushed to Akron Children's Hospital, where she later died from her injuries. In the aftermath of the murder, Sidney Powell attempted to cover up her crime by staging a break-in at the family home. She broke a window in the back of the house to make it look as though an intruder had entered, and later told police that her mother had instructed her to flee the house when she heard the noise. However, Sidney's attempts to deceive the authorities were short-lived. Within days of the killing, she was texting her friends about her mother's death, suggesting that she was aware of her actions. Sidney's father, Stephen, received a call from a detective friend who had heard that police units were being dispatched to the Powell home. Stephen immediately called his house and spoke to Sidney, who became hysterical when she heard that the police were on their way. Sidney was arrested and charged with murder, felonious assault, and tampering with evidence. Her defense team argued that she was not guilty by reason of insanity, citing her diagnosis of schizophrenia and the testimony of 3 mental health experts. During the trial, The defense presented evidence that Sydney had been experiencing delusions and hearing voices at the time of the murder. One of the experts, Dr. Sylvia Obradovich, testified that Sydney told her she did not remember the attack at all, with her last memory being of sitting on the couch with her mother before going to the basement. However, the prosecution painted a different picture. They argued that Sydney's actions were methodical and purposeful, suggesting she was aware of her wrongdoing. Assistant Prosecutor Brian Stano stated, Sydney stopped attacking with the pan, presumably went to the kitchen with a knife. She had to switch weapons and keep attacking her. Just the knife just in the neck multiple times? That is purposeful. That is trying to end someone. The prosecution also called Dr. Obradovich as a rebuttal witness, who testified that she had diagnosed Sydney with borderline personality traits and unspecified anxiety disorder, rather than schizophrenia. Dr. Obradovich argued that Sydney was malingering or feigning mental illness in order to avoid punishment for her actions. Ultimately, the jury rejected Sydney's insanity defense and found her guilty on all counts in September 2023. The verdict was met with tears from Sydney in the courtroom. On September 28, 2023, Sydney Powell was sentenced to 15 years to life in prison. The judge, Kelly McLaughlin, considered the relevant sentencing factors, including seriousness and recidivism, and determined that the minimum sentence would protect the public and punish the offender without imposing an unnecessary burden on state and local resources. Sydney's family, including her father, Stephen, and other members of the Powell family, pleaded with the judge for a more lenient sentence, arguing that a life sentence was not what Brenda would have wanted for her daughter. They expressed that Sydney's mental health should be the priority, as her condition had improved dramatically with treatment and medication since the murder. However, the judge ultimately decided on the 15-year to life sentence, with Sydney becoming eligible for parole at age 38. Sydney did not speak during the sentencing hearing, with her attorney advising her not to do so due to the pending appeal of her conviction. In October 2023, Sydney Powell's attorneys appeared before an appeals court to argue for a new trial. They claimed that the judge had denied their request to present a surrogate to the prosecution's mental health witness, who had offered a new diagnosis of Sydney's condition. Sydney's defense also accused prosecutors of misconduct when they elicited testimony from witnesses about her desire, while hospitalized after the murder, not to speak to anyone except her attorney. Sydney's attorneys argued that this violated her right to a fair trial and to counsel. Additionally, Sydney's defense argued that the court committed an error when it allowed prejudicial photos and testimony about Brenda's death to be entered into evidence. They felt the photos were not relevant to the trial, since there was no dispute concerning the manner of Brenda's death, or that Sydney caused it. The appeals court said the matter would be taken under consideration, but did not offer any time frame to expect a ruling. The case has had a profound impact on the Powell family and the Akron community. Brenda Powell's colleagues at Akron Children's Hospital expressed their heartbreak over the shocking and tragic event. The family continues to grapple with the devastating loss of a beloved mother and the complex emotions surrounding Sydney's mental illness and actions. Sydney's conviction has also raised questions about the insanity defense and how it is applied in cases involving mental illness. The prosecution's argument that Sydney was malingering and feigning illness to avoid punishment also brings up concerns about the reliability of mental health evaluations in the legal system. Furthermore, the case underscores the importance of early intervention and support for individuals struggling with mental illness. If Sydney had received proper treatment and support for her schizophrenia earlier in her life, the tragedy may have been averted. The case also highlights the need for better resources and support for families dealing with mental illness and the challenges of navigating the legal system. The tragic case of Sidney Powell serves as a stark reminder of the devastating consequences of untreated mental illness and the complex relationship between a mother and daughter. While Sidney's actions were undoubtedly horrific, the case also raises important questions about the insanity defense, the reliability of mental health evaluations in the legal system, and the need for better support and resources for individuals and families dealing with mental illness. As the Powell family continues to grieve the loss of Brenda and grapple with the aftermath of Sidney's actions, it is crucial that we learn from this tragedy and work to prevent similar occurrences in the future. By prioritizing mental health support, improving the legal system's approach to cases involving mental illness, and fostering open dialogues about these sensitive issues, we can honor Brenda's memory and work towards a more compassionate and just society.